Everyone was told never to touch the dying Lycan King, but she was the only one who stepped forward. The winter forest had always been a place where people listened more than they spoke. The tall trees stood covered in snow, the wind moved quietly between the branches, and every creature knew the old warnings about the land beyond the northern border. That was where Emma Carter lived, far away from royal halls and powerful families. She was an Omega from a small village, a woman many people overlooked because they believed an Omega could never change the world. Emma had learned to live with those judgments. She knew people often saw her title before they saw her heart. But she never allowed their opinions to take away her kindness. Every morning, she helped her neighbors prepare supplies, cared for injured animals, and shared what little she had with those who needed it. She did not have a royal name. She did not have great power. But she had something many powerful people had forgotten how to keep: compassion. On a quiet evening when the temperature dropped below freezing, Emma traveled through the edge of the forest searching for rare herbs needed by an elderly villager. The snow reached several inches across the ground, making each step careful and slow. As she walked deeper into the woods, she noticed something unusual. The forest, usually filled with small sounds of life, had become completely silent. Then she saw him. A stranger lay beneath the snow-covered trees, wearing clothing unlike anyone from her village. Even from a distance, Emma could feel that there was something different about him. There was a presence around him that felt powerful, yet strangely lonely. Every instinct told her to stay away. Stories had always warned villagers about powerful Lycan warriors and the dangers of becoming involved with their world. But when Emma looked at him, she did not see a legend or a threat. She saw someone who needed help. She slowly approached and realized the stranger was unconscious and barely holding on. Emma knew she should return to the village and call for others, but the storm was growing stronger. Leaving him alone meant leaving him without a chance, so she made a choice that no one else would have made. She removed her own winter cloak and placed it around him, using every bit of warmth she could offer. "Please stay with me," she whispered. "You are not alone." Emma did not know that the man before her was Alexander Blackwood, the most powerful Lycan in the world. She did not know he was the Lycan King, a ruler whose name was respected and feared across countless territories. She only knew that someone needed kindness. As the cold night continued, Emma followed an ancient healing tradition passed down through her family, a ritual known as the kiss of life, a rare act of compassion believed to awaken hope when all else failed. The moment passed quietly, with no promise of reward and no expectation of recognition. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the stranger opened his eyes. His gaze met hers, filled with surprise and confusion. The first sound he made was barely more than a whisper. "Who are you?" Emma stepped back, unaware that this single moment had changed the future of two kingdoms. Because the woman who saved the Lycan King's life was the one person in the world he had been waiting to find. The moment Alexander Blackwood opened his eyes, he expected to see the familiar faces of his royal guards and advisors. He expected the cold walls of his kingdom's healing chamber. He expected the weight of his crown and the endless responsibilities that followed him everywhere. Instead, he found a stranger standing beside him in the middle of a quiet forest, a young woman with worried eyes and a kindness he had never expected to receive. Emma Carter did not know what to say when the stranger looked at her. She had only followed her heart and helped someone who needed it. She had not searched for recognition. She had not imagined that the person she saved could be someone important. "Can you stand?" Emma asked softly. Alexander studied her carefully. There was something unusual about her presence. Most people reacted to his power with fear or hesitation, even before they knew his identity. But this woman looked at him like he was simply another person. Not a ruler. Not a legend. Just someone who needed help. "Who are you?" Alexander asked again. Emma hesitated. "My name is Emma Carter. I live nearby." She did not mention that she was an Omega. She did not mention that many people in her village believed her dreams were too small because of her status. She did not mention the years she spent proving that kindness was not weakness. Alexander noticed the simplicity of her answer. She had no idea who he was, and somehow that made him more curious. Before he could ask anything else, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the forest. Several figures appeared between the trees, dressed in the colors of the Royal Lycan Guard. Their expressions changed the moment they saw Alexander standing beside Emma. "Your Majesty," one of them said with surprise. Emma froze. "Your Majesty." The words felt impossible. She looked at the stranger again, trying to understand. The man she had found alone in the snow was not a traveler. He was not a lost noble. He was Alexander Blackwood, the Lycan King, the ruler whose name was known across every territory, the person countless people believed was untouchable. Emma immediately stepped back. "I did not know who you were," she said quietly. Alexander looked at her and noticed something important. She was not trying to use the situation. She was not asking for a reward. She was only worried that helping him had somehow created a problem. "You saved my life without knowing my name," Alexander said. "Why?" Emma looked confused by the question. "Because you needed help." Her answer was simple. But to Alexander, it was something he had rarely heard. In his world, every action usually carried a hidden purpose. People approached him because of his title, his power, or what they hoped to gain. But Emma had given him something with no expectation in return. As the royal guards prepared to escort Alexander back to the kingdom, he looked at Emma one last time before leaving the forest. He knew he should simply thank her and continue with his duties. But something about her kindness stayed in his thoughts. Something about the way she looked beyond his crown felt impossible to ignore. When Emma returned to her village, she tried to convince herself that the encounter was only a strange moment in an ordinary life. She believed the Lycan King would forget her once he returned to his world of power and responsibility. She was wrong, because for the first time in years, Alexander Blackwood found himself thinking about someone who saw him not as a king, but as a person. And he knew he could not simply walk away from the woman who gave him a second chance. The news of the Lycan King's return spread quickly throughout the northern kingdom. After days of uncertainty, the people celebrated that Alexander Blackwood was safe. But behind the walls of the royal palace, the king found himself thinking about something unexpected. He was not thinking about politics, ancient traditions, or the responsibilities waiting for him. He was thinking about a young Omega from a small village who had looked at him without fear. Emma Carter had no idea how unusual that moment was. In a world where power often decided how people were treated, she had done something rare. She had treated the most powerful Lycan in existence like a person who simply needed help. When Alexander returned to the palace, his advisors expected him to focus on recovering and preparing for important meetings. Instead, he asked questions about the village near the northern forest. He wanted to know about the people who lived there. He wanted to know about Emma. His advisors were surprised. They had never seen their king show such interest in someone outside the royal circle. "She is only an Omega from a small village," one advisor said carefully. Alexander looked at him with a calm expression. "She is the person who saved my life." Those simple words changed the conversation. To Alexander, Emma's status did not matter. Her actions had shown more character than many people who carried important titles. Meanwhile, Emma returned to her quiet life, believing the moment with the Lycan King had already become a distant memory. She continued helping her neighbors and living the same way she always had. But something had changed inside her. For the first time, she wondered if her kindness truly had value. For years, people had told her that being an Omega meant she should stay in the background. They told her that powerful people would never notice someone like her. Yet the one person everyone believed was impossible to reach had remembered her. A few weeks later, unexpected visitors arrived at Emma's village. Royal messengers came with an invitation from the palace. Emma was confused. She had never stepped inside royal territory before. She wondered why the Lycan King wanted to see her again. When she arrived at the palace, she felt completely out of place. The grand halls, the elegant surroundings, and the people watching her made her feel like she had entered another world. Some looked curious. Others looked uncertain. They could not understand why Alexander had invited an unknown Omega into the royal home. But Alexander knew exactly why. When he saw Emma again, he noticed the same thing he remembered from the forest. She was nervous, but she was still kind. She was surrounded by people with more status and influence than she had ever known. Yet she did not change who she was. "You came," Alexander said. Emma gave a small smile. "You asked me to." Her answer surprised him. She was not trying to impress him. She was simply being honest. As they spoke, Alexander learned more about her life. He discovered that Emma had spent years helping others while receiving very little kindness herself. He realized that behind her quiet nature was a strength he rarely saw. But not everyone in the palace welcomed her arrival. Many believed an Omega from a small village had no place near the Lycan King. They questioned her intentions and wondered why Alexander would bring someone so ordinary into his world. Emma heard their whispers, and for a moment she wondered if she should leave. But before she could make that choice, Alexander stood beside her. "She is here because she showed me something this kingdom should never forget," he said. "A person's value is not decided by their title." And for the first time, everyone in the palace saw that the Omega who saved the Lycan King was not someone who needed protection. She was someone who had already proven her strength. The days following Emma Carter's arrival at the royal palace revealed a truth that surprised everyone, including Emma herself. She had expected the grand halls of the Lycan Kingdom to feel cold and distant. She had expected the people around Alexander Blackwood to judge her before knowing her. In many ways she was right. Some members of the royal court still believed she did not belong there. They saw only an Omega from a small village standing beside the Lycan King. They did not see the person who had chosen compassion when everyone else would have walked away. But Emma refused to let their opinions change her. She had spent her entire life being underestimated, and she had learned that the best answer was not anger. It was to continue being the person she knew herself to be. Every morning, Emma walked through the palace and searched for ways to help. She spoke with servants, listened to their concerns, and learned about the lives of people who rarely had the chance to speak with someone close to the throne. The palace workers slowly began noticing something different about her. Emma did not treat them as if they were beneath her. She remembered names. She offered kindness. She showed gratitude for every small gesture. Alexander watched these moments quietly. He had spent years surrounded by people who respected his position, but rarely understood his heart. Yet Emma, who had no reason to seek his approval, was the one person who saw the man beneath the crown. One afternoon, Alexander found Emma in the palace garden. She was sitting near a frozen fountain, reading about the history of the Lycan Kingdom. He was surprised. "You are studying our history?" he asked. Emma looked up and smiled. "If I am staying here, I want to understand the people who call this place home." Her answer stayed with him. She was not trying to claim a place in his kingdom. She was trying to respect it. Alexander sat beside her and shared stories about the kingdom that were never written in official records. He told her about villages hidden beyond the mountains, families who worked hard every day, and traditions that existed long before he became king. Emma listened with genuine interest. She did not interrupt. She did not pretend to know everything. She simply wanted to understand. For Alexander, that simple act meant more than he expected. But not everyone in the palace was willing to accept the changes happening around them. The royal council continued questioning why the king would allow an Omega with no noble background to remain near him. They believed tradition was more important than emotions. They believed power should only connect with power. When Emma overheard their concerns, she quietly considered leaving. She did not want Alexander's position to become more difficult because of her. She did not want to create division inside the kingdom. But when Alexander learned what she was thinking, he found her before she could make a decision. "You believe leaving would solve everything," he said. Emma looked away. "I believe your kingdom should not suffer because of me." Alexander shook his head. "You are not the problem, Emma. The problem is that people have forgotten how to see someone beyond a title." His words surprised her. For the first time, she realized that the Lycan King was not protecting her because of the life she saved. He was standing beside her because he believed she deserved to be seen. And somewhere inside the palace walls, a new connection began to grow between the Omega who changed a king's heart and the ruler who was beginning to understand that true strength was never about power alone. The connection between Emma Carter and Alexander Blackwood continued to grow, but the attention surrounding them became impossible to ignore. Throughout the Lycan Kingdom, people began talking about the Omega who had saved their king. Some admired her kindness. Others questioned why someone without a powerful family name had become so important to the ruler of their land. Emma heard the whispers, but she tried not to let them affect her. She knew that earning trust would take time. A lifetime of judgment could not disappear in a single day. She only hoped her actions would show people the truth of who she was. Alexander, however, began noticing something deeper. He saw how Emma carried herself even when others doubted her. She never responded with anger. She never tried to prove she was better than anyone else. She simply continued choosing kindness, even when kindness was not returned. That strength impressed him more than any display of power ever could. One morning, the royal council requested a private meeting with Alexander. They expressed their concerns about Emma's growing influence inside the palace. They reminded him that tradition had always guided the Lycan kingdom. They believed the future of the crown should follow the expectations of the past. Alexander listened carefully, but he no longer accepted every belief simply because it had existed for generations. A tradition that prevents us from seeing the truth is not a tradition worth protecting, he said calmly. His advisors were surprised. They had known Alexander as a powerful ruler who valued order above everything. They had never seen him question the very foundations of the kingdom. But Emma had changed something within him. She had reminded him that a leader's responsibility was not only to protect a kingdom's borders. It was also to protect the hearts of the people living within them. Meanwhile, Emma discovered something unexpected about her own family history. While exploring the village records that had been brought to the palace, she found references to an old connection between her ancestors and the Lycan royal family. The documents suggested that her family had once helped maintain peace between different groups before those memories were lost over time. Emma was confused. She had spent her entire life believing her background was ordinary. She had never imagined that her family carried a forgotten history connected to the royal bloodline. When Alexander learned what she had discovered, he immediately wanted to understand more. Together, they studied the records and began uncovering pieces of a story that had been hidden for years. The more they learned, the clearer it became that Emma's arrival in his life might not have been a coincidence. There was a reason their paths had crossed. There was a reason she had been the one to find him in the forest. Yet Emma struggled with one thought. What if people only value me because of this connection? She asked. Quietly. What if they stop seeing me as myself? Alexander looked at her with certainty. I noticed you before I knew anything about your past. I respected you before I knew your history. Nothing about that changes. Those words gave Emma a sense of peace she had never felt before. She realized Alexander did not see her as a symbol or a destiny written by others. He saw Emma. As the mystery of her family's past unfolded, the bond between the Omega who saved the Lycan King and the ruler who chose to believe in her became stronger than either of them expected. But they both knew that discovering the truth was only the beginning. Because soon, the entire kingdom would have to decide whether it was ready to accept a future different from the one it had always known. The discovery of Emma Carter's forgotten family history changed the way many people viewed the connection between the Omega and the Lycan King. What was once seen as an unexpected event in the forest now appeared to be part of a story that had been waiting for years to be remembered. But while the truth brought new questions, it also created new challenges. Not everyone in the kingdom was ready to accept that the future could look different from the past. Emma noticed the change around her. Some people who once avoided her began approaching her with curiosity. They wanted to understand the woman who had changed Alexander Blackwood's perspective. But others remained uncertain. They believed her connection to the royal family was dangerous because it challenged traditions they had followed for generations. Emma understood their hesitation. She knew that trust could not be demanded. It had to be earned, so she continued doing what she had always done. She listened. She helped. She treated people with respect, no matter their position. Alexander watched her quietly and realized that Emma's greatest strength was not a hidden ability or a forgotten bloodline. It was the way she made people feel valued. One evening, Alexander invited Emma to walk through the royal gardens. The snow had started melting, revealing the first signs of spring beneath the cold landscape. For the first time in many years, the kingdom felt like it was moving toward something new. You have changed this place, Alexander said. Emma looked surprised. I have only tried to help where I can. Alexander smiled slightly. That is exactly why you changed it. He explained that many people in positions of power tried to prove their importance through influence and authority. But Emma had done something different. She had inspired people without trying to control them. She had reminded them that kindness could create change. Emma looked at him quietly. "You speak as if I changed you too." Alexander did not deny it. Before meeting her, he had believed being a strong ruler meant carrying every responsibility alone. He believed showing uncertainty was a weakness. But Emma showed him that understanding others did not make someone less powerful. It made them a better leader. Their conversation was interrupted when a message arrived from the border territories. Several leaders had heard about Emma's connection to the royal bloodline and wanted answers. Some were interested in forming a stronger alliance. Others feared that old traditions were disappearing too quickly. Alexander knew this moment would test the kingdom. It was easy to speak about change inside the palace. It was much harder to convince an entire society to embrace it. The next day, Alexander stood before the council with Emma beside him. Many expected him to speak only about her family history. Instead, he spoke about her actions. He spoke about the night she found him in the forest. He spoke about how she helped without knowing his identity. "She did not save a king," Alexander said. "She helped someone who needed help." The room became quiet. His words reminded everyone that Emma's worth had never come from her connection to destiny. Came from who she was. For the first time, many members of the council began seeing her differently. She was not simply an Omega from a small village. She was someone who had shown courage when it mattered most. As the meeting ended, Emma realized something important. She had spent years wondering if she belonged anywhere. But now she understood that belonging was not given by a title or a family name. It was created through the choices a person made every day. And beside her, the Lycan King finally understood that the woman who saved his life had also helped him discover what kind of ruler he truly wanted to become. The days following Alexander Blackwood's announcement brought a new feeling across the Lycan Kingdom. For the first time in many years, people began discussing the future instead of repeating the fears of the past. The idea of an Omega standing beside the Lycan King was still unfamiliar to many, but Emma Carter's actions continued to speak louder than any rumor. She never asked anyone to accept her because of a title or a connection to destiny. She simply continued being the person who had always chosen kindness, even when kindness was not always given back. As the kingdom prepared for a gathering between different territories, Emma found herself facing a challenge she never expected. Leaders from distant regions arrived at the palace with questions about the ancient connection between her family and the royal bloodline. Some were curious, some were cautious. They wanted to know why the forgotten history had returned and what it meant for the future of the Lycan Kingdom. Emma felt the pressure of their attention. She had spent most of her life living quietly, never wanting influence or recognition. Now, every decision she made seemed to be noticed by people across the land. Alexander noticed her uncertainty. One evening, he found her standing near the palace balcony, looking over the kingdom below. "You are wondering if you belong here," he said gently. Emma looked at him with surprise. "How did you know?" Alexander smiled. "Because I used to ask myself the same question." His answer caught her attention. She had always imagined the Lycan King as someone who had everything: power, respect, a kingdom that followed his commands. But in that moment she saw something different. She saw someone who also carried doubts. Someone who understood what it meant to feel alone. "People see your crown before they see you," Emma said quietly. Alexander nodded. "And people see your Omega status before they see you." For a moment, neither of them spoke. They both understood what it felt like to be judged by something they did not choose. That shared understanding became the foundation of a bond stronger than either of them expected. During the gathering, Emma stood beside Alexander as leaders from different regions shared their concerns. Some still believed old traditions should remain unchanged. Others believed the kingdom needed to grow. When it was Emma's turn to speak, she did not talk about power or destiny. She spoke about people. She spoke about families who wanted peace. She spoke about ordinary villagers who simply wanted to live without fear or judgment. Her words were simple, but they reached everyone in the room because they came from experience rather than ambition. Alexander watched the leaders listen to her, and he realized something important. Emma did not need his protection from the world. She had the strength to face it herself. What she needed was someone who believed in her. After the gathering ended, several leaders approached Emma with a new respect. They no longer saw her as an unexpected presence in the palace. They saw her as someone who represented a different future. But as the evening settled over the kingdom, a new message arrived. Hidden within the old records was another secret connected to Emma's family, one that could change how everyone understood the bond between the Omega and the Lycan King. Alexander looked at the message, then at Emma. He knew the truth they had discovered was only the beginning, because sometimes destiny does not reveal everything at once. Sometimes it waits until two people are ready to face what comes next together. The discovery hidden within the ancient records changed the way Emma Carter and Alexander Blackwood viewed their journey. For many years, the history between the Omega bloodline and the Lycan royal family had been forgotten, buried beneath misunderstandings and old traditions. But as the forgotten pages were carefully studied, a different story began to appear. It was not a story about power or control. It was a story about trust, balance, and two different worlds finding a way to understand each other. Emma sat quietly in the royal library, looking through the records that connected her family to the Lycan kingdom. She never imagined that her simple life in a small village would lead her to a place where her choices could influence an entire kingdom. Yet even with all the attention around her, she remained the same person Alexander had met in the forest. She still cared about the people around her. She still listened before speaking. She still believed that kindness mattered more than status. Alexander noticed this more than anyone. As the Lycan King, he had spent years surrounded by people who wanted something from him. Many admired his position, his strength, and his authority, but few ever asked how he truly felt. Emma was different. She never looked at him as a symbol. She never treated him as someone untouchable. She saw the person behind the crown. One evening, Alexander joined Emma in the library as she studied the old records. "You know," he said softly, "when I first met you, I thought you were simply someone who had a kind heart." Emma smiled. "And now?" Alexander looked at the pages in front of them. "Now I realize your kindness was never simple. It was the strongest part of you." His words stayed with her. For so long, Emma had believed that being gentle meant being overlooked. She had believed that people like her had to work twice as hard to prove they mattered. But Alexander helped her understand that compassion was not something to hide. It was something that could change the world. As the days passed, the kingdom slowly began to transform. Villagers who once felt distant from the royal family started seeing a different side of their ruler. Alexander began visiting communities more often, listening to concerns instead of only receiving reports. Many noticed that his leadership had changed. He was still a powerful king, but now he led with understanding. And many believed Emma was the reason. However, Emma worried about something she could not ignore. She wondered if her place beside Alexander was based only on an ancient connection written in forgotten records. She wanted to know that her importance came from who she was, not from what history said she represented. When she finally shared her thoughts with Alexander, he answered without hesitation. "Destiny may have brought us together," he said, "but my respect for you came from your choices. I chose to believe in you because of the person you are." Those words gave Emma the answer she had been searching for. Their connection was not just a legend. It was built through every moment they shared, every challenge they faced, and every time they chose to understand each other. As the kingdom prepared for a new era, Emma realized she was no longer the forgotten Omega from a small village. She was someone who had found her place not through a title, but through courage and compassion. And Alexander knew that the greatest discovery was not the secret hidden in the ancient records. It was the person who had reminded a king that the strongest hearts were often the gentlest ones. The season changed across the Lycan kingdom, and with it came a new beginning that no one could have imagined. The halls that once felt divided slowly became places where people gathered with hope instead of uncertainty. The old traditions that had separated families for generations were no longer the only voices guiding the future. A different kind of leadership had emerged, one built on understanding, respect, and the belief that every person had value. At the center of this change stood Emma Carter, the Omega who had once believed she was invisible. She remembered the days when people judged her before knowing her name. She remembered feeling like her kindness was something the world ignored. But the journey she had taken showed her something important. Being gentle did not mean being weak. Choosing compassion did not mean lacking courage. Sometimes the greatest changes began with a single person deciding to care. Alexander Blackwood also looked back on how much his life had changed. Before Emma entered his world, he believed being a king meant carrying every burden alone. He believed strength came from always appearing certain and never showing doubt. But Emma taught him that a true leader did not need to stand above everyone else. A true leader stood beside the people he protected. The kingdom saw the difference. Alexander was still the Lycan King, respected by many and responsible for countless lives. But he was no longer the distant ruler people only admired from afar. He became a king who listened, a king who understood, a king who remembered that every person behind the palace walls had a story worth hearing. On the day the kingdom gathered to celebrate a new chapter, Emma stood beside Alexander and looked across the crowd. She saw villagers, royal families, and leaders from different territories standing together. It was a sight she never believed possible when she was just a young Omega living a quiet life far from the royal world. Alexander looked at her and smiled. "Do you remember the night we met?" he asked. Emma laughed softly. "I remember finding someone who needed help." Alexander nodded. "And I remember finding the person who changed everything." Their bond had started with a simple act of kindness in a frozen forest. Emma had not saved a king because she wanted recognition. She had helped because someone needed her. That moment became the foundation of something greater than either of them expected. It reminded everyone that destiny was not only written in ancient records or royal traditions. Destiny was also created through choices made with a sincere heart. Years of misunderstanding between different groups began to fade, because one Omega showed the world that compassion could be stronger than pride. One Lycan King learned that protecting a kingdom meant more than holding power. It meant understanding the people within it. Together, Emma and Alexander created a future where no one was judged only by their title, their background, or the expectations placed upon them. The forgotten Omega became a symbol of hope. The powerful Lycan King became a symbol of wisdom. And the story of the woman who saved a king became a reminder that the greatest strength was not found in power alone. It was found in kindness, courage, and the choice to see the heart behind every soul.